All right, welcome back. This is the third video of a paper that I wrote on a correspondence view of emotion and human nature. So it appeared in a journal called East-West Thought a few years ago. So this is the third part, and the first two parts I tried to show what the correspondence view of emotions looks like, and tried to reject one view that says it consists of either causal relations or relations to formal objects rather than to real objects. And if you want to go back and watch those videos, you can. This is part 3 in this series. So this part, what I want to talk about is human nature, the kinds of things that we are. Because if we're going to talk about a correspondence view of emotions, we have to talk about how we as human beings with certain kinds of natures and the minds that we have, or the feelings that we have within our souls, within our consciousness, can match or fail to match how things really are in reality. Okay, so part 3. To give a robust defense of the reality of natures is beyond the scope of this paper. However, I'd like to consider de Souza's rejection of natures and show that at least this attempt to reject human nature fails. This, of course, will not show that there is human nature or exactly what it is, but given our discussion of the nature of emotions, since human nature plays this crucial role to the view I want to advocate, I believe that I must show how one major objection is highly problematic. So in his paper, Being Natural, from 2000, de Souza states there is no human nature. Now I take this to be logically equivalent to the claim, no human beings are beings with natures, or more formally, for all x, if h of x, then it's not the case that n of x. Okay, let's try to put that slightly formally there. How does de Souza prove this proposition? If P is a negative universal categorical proposition and is known by deduction, then there are 4 possible argument types by means of which it can be proven, in 2 possible moods and 2 possible figures for each mood of traditional Aristotelian logic, EAE and AEE syllogisms. Now, de Souza can't use EAE arguments. The minor premise in each argument contains an A proposition with a universal generalization about all human beings. Since P denies human natures any quality of human beings have in common, this route is closed for him. This leaves an AEE, and all SRP, no SRP, all MRP, no SRM, therefore no SRP form of syllogism, AEE form. You could have different moods depending on what you do with a minor premise. Okay, we'll just leave that for those of you who love Aristotelian logic to work out on your own. So this leaves the AE moods with their 2 figures, which are simply versions of conversion of an E proposition. This would look something like this. This argument, let's call it an AEE 2/4 for the mood and figure of the argument. So it could be mood AEE AEE mood and either figure 2 or figure 4, depending on a conversion of the minor premise. Okay. So here it is. All nature having beings are MMM. So just fill in that blank for some quality that unites all nature having beings. No human beings are MMM. That again, that MMM, that missing term there, the major term of the syllogism, is supposed to be blank, right? So you just fill in that blank, whatever nature human beings have, and no humans have that. So therefore no human beings are nature having beings. That's the structure of how an argument for de Souza's proposition P, which is the proposition that no human beings are beings with natures. Okay, there's no such thing as human nature. That's what de Souza's arguing. Okay, so can de Souza use this mood? The answer is no. Here's why. A negative universal makes a claim about all members of each of the categories in question. That is to say, both the subject and the predicate terms are distributed in an E proposition. However, if one denies that there are any properties that all members of the category share, then one can't even specify the category of humans, and thus can't say anything about the category at all, including that they lack natures. To say that humans don't have natures is to refer to a category human, to refer to categories to refer to something which all members of the category have in common, and de Souza denies that there's any property or properties which all members have in common. Therefore, de Souza can't reasonably prove P. In fact, given what de Souza says throughout this paper, it appears to be an extreme form of nominalism about universals as applied to biological entities, seems to cut against the possibility of asserting P1 in the argument above. If AEE2/4 is to be established, the middle term must apply. However, if DS denies natures across the board, D'Souza denies natures across the board, then he would be forced to deny P1 regardless of what the middle term is. This is why I think shows the absurdity, possibly the self-refuting nature of P. If P were true, it could be proven to be true, but to prove it true, one would have to maintain that all human beings could see, or possibly could see, that it were true by means of shared logical ability. There's a lot of irony in this. There's no such thing as human nature, and you prove that to be true, then there's got to be something that all humans have in common to be able to see that it's true. But if you deny that human beings have anything in common, namely human nature, then you can't prove it's true. There's something self-refuting here. It's always a problem for a philosophical position. If that were the case, then one maintains that there's a property that all human beings have in common, but that is part of what it means to have a human nature. D'Souza additionally says that the following regarding natures, which if taken together entail certain difficulties. Consider the following claim about human characteristics. He calls this HC, or maybe I call it HC. Can't recall. Okay, here. This is quoting D'Souza. I'm calling this HC. We have the word of biologist that lineage of human carries with it no interesting set of defining characteristics. That's from page 292 of his 2000 paper. This is the case, a description of the type X as F is being asserted by HC, which involves at least two things. X has a relation to other members of F. X stands in relation of being of the lineage of other Fs. Okay, so here's the problem with HC and 1 and 2 taken together. HC and 1 pull against one another. If one claims that X stands in relation to other members of F, one has to specify what type of relation. If the notion of relation is to be intelligible, it must be specific. There must be a kind of relation to which all members of F stand. However, and here's the rub, if there are no properties connecting all members of F together, then there can be no members of F at all, unless grouped arbitrarily. But then the question is, what differentiates Fs from non-Fs? One can't specify. If one can't specify, then it seems that one can't specify at all, including being specific about N. In addition, HC and 2 pull against one another. How can X be a member of F because of lineage, and the lineage itself has no interesting set of defining characteristics for membership in F? If X is F because of L, and L has no defining characteristics, then one can't say X is F because of L. In addition, if every human being is a counterexample, then there just aren't human beings at all. They're just H1, H2, H3. Go to any large crowd of people, like, oh, there's a bunch of human beings here. Nope, no, there's not. No, on this view. There's just that thing, that thing, that thing, and that thing. Okay. Now this gets into the regress problem that faces any form of nominalism. Okay. However, if there's really no commonality, one can't even assert that there are H's, H1, H2, H2, because H itself has to have something in common with other H's. What D'Souza has here is différance in the worst possible sense. Difference. You want to say it Frenchly, I guess you can. It is the worst because it is self-refuting. To say there's no commonality is to make a negative universal generalization, which is a type of commonality. So finally, quoting David Hull from 1986, his ideas have been around a while. D'Souza asserts that variability is at the core of our being. If this is true, then it implies that to be is to be variable, which seems logically equivalent to be is to vary. Suppose we call this proposition V. To be human is to vary. Suppose we consider not V, the negation of that. It is not the case that to be is to vary. So in the strongest sense, the conjunction of V and not V is also to vary. Therefore, V and not to V is to vary. So we can assert that to vary is to be variable. V and not V is variability, and thus V and not V are at the core of our being. But V and not V are contradictory. Therefore, logical contradiction is the core of our being. Now, it may depend on who you hang out with. you might affirm that. But if logical contradiction is the core of our being, then this applies to V itself. V and not V are at the core of our being. To be human is to vary and not to vary. Thus it follows that D'Souza's claim and its contradictory both apply to human nature. That is, D'Souza's claim about are asserted to be both true and false. And this is worrisome, to put it mildly. Okay. To alleviate this worry, D'Souza states that the sum of our emotional reactions to the worlds we create is all there is to human nature. Let me say that again. The sum of our emotional reactions to the world we create is all there is to quote-unquote human nature. Say that one more time. The sum of our emotional reactions to the worlds we create is all there is to human nature. That's from page 307. This will apply equally to emotional reactions and to rationality as well. Although D'Souza has been seeking a way of formal rational judgments, if there are no human natures, there are no rational beliefs either. Rationality, a property that could be exemplified by all human beings having a human nature, will itself fall by the wayside. If rationality is connected with emotions, then it will itself be part of the stories we are able to tell ourselves. As history changes, so do the stories. End quote. Sorry, let me say that again. Quote, as history changes, so do the stories. That's on page 307, according to D'Souza. Now, if that's the case, then we can't be rationally persuaded to believe what we are presented with in D'Souza's paper. There are other ways to motivate belief, but in this case, it can't be reason which does the work. Thus, I conclude with this idea. I've argued that emotional states can be identified by their phenomenal qualities. I've argued that these qualities could correspond if there were something for them to correspond to. I've considered briefly the problems with the notion of formal objects as that to which emotions correspond. Finally, I've argued that one possible defeater of the notion of natures, as presented by D'Souza, as that to which, or by means of which our emotions correspond, is highly problematic. What remains to be done is to offer a clear account of what exactly the nature of being human is, such that the real phenomenological qualities which we're all familiar with can be such that they correlate to real emotive properties which are in objects apart from our experience. Now, this is a long and difficult task which cuts against materialist notions of emotions, but attempts to capture the old notion that our emotions can be commensurate with the world. And that's what really takes us back to, that's the end of the paper. But this really takes us back to the old view. And, Lewis, in his Abolition of Man, gives this nice analogy of the old and the new view of the way in which, especially in education, the way in which the older view, when it came to educating the young especially, tried to train the emotions versus the contemporary. The old view was one of taking human nature and passing it on to the next generation. Lewis uses the examples of birds, a mother bird, teaching the young bird to fly. This tree behind me here, we had a couple of crows nest, beautiful black birds, very smart birds. Crow's nest back there, and there were some little hatchlings, chicks, called crow chicks. Yes, you do. I'm not an ornithologist, so. And they were trying to coax the birds out of the nest. Eventually, they took off. But it was that participation in the shared humanity that made for emotional, in the case of Lewis's view, education. To be able to be trained by human beings who share our nature in order to have the appropriate emotional response to the world we live in. That's very different from the view like the people I've read to you in this paper over the course of these couple of videos. In that view, what is given to us is a very different sort of approach to emotional training. In that view, we are left with the mind, which is identified with the brain, so it's a mental reductionism, with quote-unquote formal objects, which are nothing more than our own creation, and with an absence of any kind of shared humanity. Now, once you have that extreme nominalism, that extreme shift to naturalism, that extreme shift to a view of the world that is absent of anything objectively real, then the way in which the emotions become trained is very different than the antiquated, what I'm calling antiquated. It's not antiquated. It's old, but it's not antiquated. But pejoratively called antiquated view. So in the old view of human nature, the view that C.S. Lewis and Aquinas, among others, advocate, is that one generation passes on humanity to another and trains the young in their emotional responses to reality. But in this new view, it's something much different. It's propaganda, drugs, maybe, coercion, peer pressure. There are a variety of different ways that humanity can be molded. Genetic technology, genetic engineering, algorithms, you name it. Right? So I think it might be helpful to go back and read the view from Lewis from the Abolition of Man. We'll let him have the last words. Till quite modern times, all teachers and all men believed the universe to be such that certain emotional reactions on our part could be either congruous or incongruous to it. Believed, in fact, that objects did not merely receive, but could merit our approval or disapproval, our reverence or our contempt. Thanks for watching.
Stay psyched, Grom. You.